Integrating remote access through SDK and OEM solutions isn't without its own challenges, but today's tools are transforming products by making remote access easier to integrate, scale, and secure. Welcome to this third episode of RealVNC's Remote Access Redefined podcast series. Our discussion in today's podcast highlights today's key trends, including the main fields in which remote access integration happens and how to address the associated challenges. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek. And joining me today is Dom Parks. He's lead developer for OEM at RealVNC. Dom, thanks again, once again for joining me. Glad you're here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Glad you're here as well. And then we're also joined by RealVNC remote access integration customer, Frank Yoder. He's CEI at REJI. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Glad you're here as well. Now, Frank, I'm going to start with you. From what my understanding here, that REJI's integration of RealVNC has been a success specifically around proactively monitoring customer kiosks and POS software. We're going to talk about those details a little later on. But before we get started, could you maybe quickly spend 30 seconds or so and tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself and the company you work for?
Sure. So REJI's been around for about 10 years. We have a software platform for digital signage and kiosks. We also do a lot of custom application work for our larger customers along those lines. And one of the challenges we've always faced is being able to monitor or help our customers monitor their hundreds or even thousands of digital signage screens or kiosks out there in the field. And usually what happens is people receive a notification from a store that one of the screens is down, and that's how they get reactively maintain their systems. But REJI, we're in the market of actually building software that makes it a proactive process, so they don't have to wait for a customer to tell them that there's something wrong with the kiosk. And that's where we've integrated real tightly with RealVNC to make that happen.
Awesome. And was that an SDK or an OEM integration real quick?
We started out with OEM integration and we love it, but we are actually in the process of switching to SDK. We purchased the SDK license at the beginning of the year, and we're right now in the development phase of that process.
Awesome. Glad that's a great overview. Appreciate that. Dom, I want to kind of tail off of something that Frank mentioned, because I asked about whether it was SDK and OEM. And I realized that since we're in episode 3, there might be some folks that are joining us for the very first time and they didn't listen to episodes 1 and 2. And so maybe we could sort of roll the clock back, as it were, to one of the topics we talked about in episode 1. And maybe could you provide a brief overview of what remote access integration is, what organizations achieve with it, and then what SDK and OEM integrations mean to them? Could you do that first?
Yeah, makes sense. Remote access integration is effectively taking, in this case, our tried and tested and audited remote access software and integrating it into a wider project or product or use case. And obviously, in REJI's case, it's a fairly specific use case and a fairly specific integration. But it might be an existing product that needs remote support, or it might be like something really specific, like bringing a particular screen to another location on a ship. That's a use case that we've seen. But fundamentally, it's about bringing desktops to another location, effectively. OEM is what we name our Connect integrations, and that's using an off-the-shelf software called Connect to integrate into an existing use case and perhaps embed that software in a product and deploy it that way. And that's integrated via things like scripting, parameters that we have in Connect, and we have an Access API for managing users and things like that. So it's pretty much a off-the-shelf, pre-made, drop-in part that maybe it suits the use case, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, then we've got the SDK, which is based off the same code base, same usability, same use cases mostly, but you've got a programmatic interface, APIs that allow your developers to build something really tailored down to suit whatever you need it to do. Maybe even rebranding, doing something particularly niche that just isn't covered by Connect. I think that covers it.
And one other question that we did cover kind of in episode 1, but I still want to talk about it here because of even just the nature of Frank, of your response, talking about how it's OEM and now you're switching to SDK. Dom, what's the main reasons why an organization would pick one option over the other? Could you quickly talk about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, Frank might have a better insight into that, being someone who's going through the process of switching. But from what I've seen, it's partly about the use case, it's partly about the ownership and what you actually need to do, and your integration needs. So sort of things that I talked about, in episode 1. It might be about the specific devices you're supporting, so there might not be support for those so easily with a off-the-shelf product. But it could be just down to people and time and effort. So you might prefer a drop-in component that you don't need to do really anything else with. So that could be a key thing.
Yeah, I might chime in here.
Good.
What we found out was we could start out with OEM product and get up and running really quickly. I didn't take a lot of effort on our side to simply integrate the OEM freestanding product with our software platform. Once we did that, we proved that it worked, and then we tried it out with a few customers, and it scaled up. That's when we found out, okay, now we're ready to move up and go to the SDK product because it'll give us more ability to customize things at more granularity, make it the way we want it to operate in its entirety. So that's why we moved up to SDK. But we first tried out OEM just to make sure this was going to work. And by the way, we tried a lot of other competitors of RealVNC, and they all did certain parts pretty much the same, such as displaying the screen. That was all standard. Nobody fell down and the video was choppy or anything like that. As long as it was a decent connection, there was no latency. It was just fine. But the areas that RealVNC excelled in is the ability, for instance, to export some of the actual portals into a file that you can then call up from our app and pop those windows, those portals open. And the other tools, every one of the other tools didn't give us that ability. We actually had to log on to their portal and then open up the individual screens one at a time. But by RealVNC and allowing us to export all these individual files, one file for each portal, we could then, in our software, run all those files in succession. So I could open up 100 portals at one time and then place them strategically on the screen where I wanted them to go, so that I would have 15 on each row for 5 rows or something like that.
And going back to the OEM versus SDK, was that some functionality you were able to get just with OEM? And I'm just curious there, or is that something that you're now doing with the SDK?
No, we were able to do that with the OEM, and we'll obviously also be able to do it with the SDK. But that was a feature that RealVNC really brought to the forefront and made us choose RealVNC.
Excellent. I appreciate that insight there. Let's talk about, since now we have a level set on OEM and SDK, at least what they are with regard to remote access integration. Let's talk about roadblocks. And Dom, in your case, I'm asking what are some of the main roadblocks that make maybe a potential customer reluctant towards utilizing remote access integration? You could talk about it from a sort of a standpoint of all the prospective customers you've ever talked to. And then, Frank, I'd love to have you provide some, just some input after that of maybe what were some of the roadblocks that maybe you had. Not so much about what customers or competitors have or don't have, but just organizationally, like maybe from a development standpoint, or how what's the time to market, or higher business level type of roadblocks that come into play. But Dom, what are some ones you normally hear from customers? Is it feature sets, kind of like Frank is touting some things that RealVNC had that others didn't, or is it something that's more organizational, something about development? What are the main roadblocks when companies are looking at remote access integration but become kind of reluctant to take advantage of it?
Yeah, it can be feature sets. It can be that there's some particular thing like I don't know, web integration or a particular platform that needs to be supported that's difficult, and that can be a major roadblock. I think with our SDK, that's easier to overcome because it's on our side as well as on the customer side. It's more cut down. It's a kind of set of building blocks to build something, so it's easier for us to bring that to other use cases and other platforms. I think the one that I said before, so about time, effort, availability of development teams, that's a big roadblock. I think that's easier to overcome if it's just dropping in Connect. Can be a roadblock to moving on to the SDK sort of integration. I think some roadblocks for people who are looking at the wider space of remote access are things like the kind of security aspects. There's both the actual security, like this has AES 128, AES 256, it has perfect forward secrecy, all these kind of specific things that we can offer. But there are other things like the perceived security of actually opening effectively a hole into your network. And you need to be quite careful about how you do that, and there can be clashes there about one team who wants to do this and another team in a company who can't allow that. And similar to that, when people are looking at our competitors and other general remote access solutions, they'll be looking at the licensing and how you can integrate that into a solution. So it might be tempting to go with something open source and just bring that in. There's quite a lot of different VNC implementations that sprang out of our original VNC back in the 90s, and some of those do some of these things, but I think a lot of people have qualms about, can we actually use that? Is it going to be a problem with GPL? Is it going to be a problem with the way we need to build it into the solution that we're building? So that can be there. And I think regulation as well. So it's kind of the case of specific industries are going to have particular regulatory things that you just can't easily do without confirming that the solutions that you've got here, that you're bringing in can actually adhere to those things.
Yeah, and on our side, as far as roadblocks, a roadblock with the OEM version versus the SDK is the fact that with the SDK, we'll be able to more tightly integrate it with our product, so it looks more seamless. Whereas with the OEM, it looks like it's coupled together. Whereas the SDK will enable us to take that out. Also, we do get pushback from clients. If somebody is building this for themselves, then they control their own security concerns. But with us, we're building it. We're providing a service and a product for clients that's going to monitor their system, so they have security concerns. And by going with RealVNC, we can simply pass on the information. RealVNC says, "Hey, we've covered that. Here's the documentation that states that fact." Whereas if you go open source, you're on your own. But open source may work for somebody who's building it in-house and is going to only use it in-house because they can get away with satisfying their own security concerns. But we can't do that. We've got a lot of different customers, and they all have different security concerns, and so we rely on RealVNC to provide that for us.
Excellent, appreciate that, Dom. Let's jump into talking about some current trends in remote access. And then, Frank, I've got some questions specifically for you about your use case in coming up in just a few minutes here. But at the same time, while I'm asking Dom, if you've got some commentary, please, by all means, we'd love to get your input just from a real world, in the field type of opinion. If you have one about any of the questions I'm asking Dom, so please feel free to join us in that conversation. Dom, I'm wondering, just when it comes to remote access integration, what fields, what industries are most tied to utilizing or are most open to utilizing remote access integration, where it's the most common, and maybe why are they attracted to the idea that much?
Yeah, it's quite a big question there. So I think the immediate example, point of sale, does seem to be a big area, and digital signage, kind of adjacent type industries, does seem to be a big area that we're seeing, at least, of growth in remote access. I think it makes sense. You've got a visual medium. You want to see what's on it. You want to bring that screen somewhere else, or maybe even use VNC to display a video wall screen somewhere else as well. So there's a lot of use cases there. We're seeing, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's got to be at least sort of 20 to 30% of our customers in the OEM space are in that sort of industry. And healthcare that we covered last time, that's also really quite big. And I think that's only going to grow as well. And they've got a similar thing where they've got devices that have displays with scan results or with live MRI data, and they need to bring those somewhere else so that people can see that for diagnostic purposes, health diagnostic purposes, and also see it for fixing the machine and updating the machine. So those are the obvious ones that we see a fair bit of. But there's also quite a lot in manufacturing. I think that's a big growth area. Manufacturing has kind of traditionally been a bit off grid. A lot of the devices have been not on the internet, and that's changed. Maybe before some of those parts of that industry are really ready for them to be online. Some of them have built-in VNC servers in some of those sorts of devices, HMIs and PLCs, and that isn't a security-first approach, and it's going to need to be updated. So I think we're seeing growth there of people trying to figure out how do we do this safely. And there are kind of a whole host of use cases within the maritime, agri-tech, automotive. So you've got a machine that moves of some kind. It could be a ship, it could be farming machinery, it could be a car, and they've got a screen, and you want to be able to bring that somewhere else, or you want to be able to support the person using it in the case of agriculture and ships. And yeah, that's pretty big. And I think you also asked.
I was going to say, it feels like the industries that are utilizing it and should be utilizing it are ones when they have a product and or service that's going to be running on a remote device. And you said their keyword and support, and they're either required to support it. That's one thing, right? Makes it easier. And assuming that it's software of some kind, so that way they can support that, or your other point of having to take a piece of information that's on one device and visually port it to another. Is the two big use cases. Are there other use cases where this comes into play besides just support and let's call it remote visual porting? I'm making up terms now, but maybe you have a better term that you guys use internally.
I don't know if we do actually. Cutting the wire is a good term. Like if you want to bring a screen to another place, there are easy ways to do it with HDMI. There are easy ways to do it with USB, and some of the use cases that we've seen have been actually. We don't want to do either of those things. We want to make something that doesn't care about what connection it's running over. It's agnostic of that entirely. So yeah, the use case is kind of cutting the wire in a broader sense. Yeah. So I mean, I guess the use cases are all kind of wider for integration. At least they're all wider than just support, just desktop IT support. They're always something that's a bit more than that, or maybe they're actually really niche use cases like the sort of use cases on ships that we've seen where there's a radar screen and they want to bring that to another part of the ship. It's quite specific. It's quite basic, but it's kind of revolutionary for what they're doing. They don't need to have multiple versions of the same bit of hardware or complicated kind of back-end hooking up of machines to other machines. They can kind of just remote the whole thing using our protocol. And I think a lot of it's about wanting to add value to whatever an existing product or solution might be, and wanting to differentiate it from other people's equivalent bits of hardware or software. Does that answer the question?
No, you've answered. You're good enough. I just wonder if there's other kind of use cases there, but maybe a different question to look at this is: are there other industries that you think will be getting into this, will be utilizing and start integrating remote access into their solutions that aren't already today? Yeah,
good question. I mean, I think my mind immediately jumps to sorts of technologies that people are talking about or have been talking about recently, and we've seen a little bit of interest from the AR, VR world, and there are some fairly obvious use cases there, and there are some that are less obvious, and also AI as well. And those are again, there's some specific use cases that we've seen there. So those, if you can call those things industries, then they're, I think, places where we could see growth of this, assuming that those industries actually grow. But things like VR, AR has a really compelling use case with co-browsing. So you can use the VR headset to look at some data or some device, or even follow a person who's using the VR headset and point out things that they need to know from a remote location. And yeah, we've seen some use cases in VR to do with visualization of information that's currently on desktops and it needs to be brought into the VR headset, into the VR world for collaboration. And that seems to work better than just being at a bank of desktops for the use cases that we've seen. And some of those are just very specifically, we want to bring the laptop into the metaverse, and we want to be able to type at that laptop. We want to be able to sit next to someone in the metaverse, and they can type into my laptop, even though, it's 1,000 miles away or whatever. So that's use case we've seen, and I kind of hope it grows. We'll see how well that goes.
Well, I can actually testify that it is growing. When we started using RealVNC, we realized the product, as well as the competitors, was usually utilized in a remote desktop support environment. That was the bread and butter, the workhorse. That's what the tool was built for primarily. But that's not at all what we use it for. I believe we live in a screen age. So we're seeing screens everywhere. We have been seeing screens increase in the environment, and wherever we are. Public computing, there's always a PC or some kind of compute device behind the screen where it's displaying information somewhere. And that's just increasing. So, and also self-automation. You can check in, check out. You can purchase your hamburger from a fast food place on the screen. All this self-automation and remote screens all have to be monitored. So we use it strictly for being able to monitor and then control and update, etc., those remote screens. So that's what we use it for. So it's really the unattended access is what we use entirely with RealVNC, is to be able to see 100 screens at one time, point out that, oh, look at screen number 56, there's something wrong with that. Let me remote onto it. Well, you're already remoted onto it, but let me expand it and start operating on it and fix the problem or diagnose it. So that's what we use it for. It's not actually waiting for somebody to call up saying, I've got something wrong with my computer. Can you remote on and start helping me out with it? It's strictly unattended mass amounts of screens that we're using the tool to monitor and then diagnose as well as troubleshoot. So it's a lot different than I think a lot of the people are using it, because they're using it for remote desktop support.
I think that's where the integration of this technology comes into its own, because you can get a lot more proactive. You can, build it into whatever. I
think that market, that area is going to do nothing but expand, because let's face it, screens are cheap, compute devices are cheap. You can put them anywhere out in the public, connected to the internet, and then you can do things, display stuff, ask questions, get feedback, make it interactive if you need to. That's the future of computing in our life, and I think it's just going to increase and grow. And that's why we use RealVNC to monitor this. How many times have we gone through an airport and we see a screen that's black or blue screen of death, whatever, it's down, and nobody seems to be fixing it because it hasn't been reported yet. But just like where you have a what do they call it, a knock, where a security room for a large facility like a campus, and they have cameras all over the campus, and they've got pictures on a large screen or a bunch of screens with each feed coming from each camera. It's the same thing that we do, and using RealVNC is you have all these video feeds, so to speak, of what's running on the screen at that very moment from all these remote screens, remote devices. And so that's the future. That's what everybody has to maintain, so that you don't walk through the airport and see something down. You keep those screens up and running, because when something has an issue, you're the one that sees it first before even the customers. Well, quite often that's exactly what happens. We'll log in periodically for our customers throughout the day, usually 3 times a day, and we'll check on each and every screen. And if you had to log into them one at a time, can you imagine how long it would take me to check out 100 screens? It would take hours. So this way, I see them all at once. 15 seconds, then I know if everything's up and running in 50 stores. You can't do that with any other tool except being able to see them all at one time. And there's plenty of software that will go out there and say, oh, CPU utilization, hard drive utilization, but that doesn't give you what's on the screen. The bottom line is, that's useful information, and you can have reports and and triggers kick off that let you know that something has gone down, printers out of paper, etc. But being able to see the screen is invaluable, and people don't realize that until they start using RealVNC to do that for hundreds of screens. And then they say, the support text will tell you, I can't live without this. We need this.
Frank, maybe we can talk a little bit more about what prompted REJI to actually integrate remote access into the products, and talk about what you were trying to achieve. I mean, Dom talked about three kind of basic things, and Dom, I'm summarizing for you, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth. But the things that organizations are trying to achieve is better support. They're trying to transport a screen, something to make it visual to some other location in the world or in a building or whatever the case is. And then you also mentioned something about just differentiating the business and differentiating the offering. What prompted your company to integrate remote access, and what were you trying to achieve?
Okay, so we primarily were building software for kiosk, and we specialized in transactional software. So if you go into a fast food place and you order your food on the kiosk, that's the kind of software that we were writing. And we did it for small mom and pops, and we did it for large organizations. Small mom and pops, they can maintain their 5 stores easily. However, the large organization may have 100 or 1,000 kiosks out there. And what happens is the kiosk goes down, somebody in the store reports it to the manager, and he says, I'll make a note of that. And maybe 4 hours later, he gets around to sitting down and typing out a trouble ticket and gets the IT. Literally, that kiosk will be down for quite a while. And so that happens all the time. In the real world, what happens with people who haven't done what we've done is then they go through that whole process. The engineer then remotes onto the machine, because they almost always have remote software on there. And then they address it from that point and fix it, or get on the phone with the managers out there or somebody out there and walk through trying to troubleshoot it and diagnose it and fix it. But what we found with our larger customers was, they're losing money when that kiosk is down. So we were able to build, using RealVNC under the covers, build a solution that was able to actually monitor them all real time, whether their IT staff does it or they outsource it and let us keep track of their screens and make sure they're up and running. And then they reduce their downtime by quite a bit. We can get 5 nines on our downtime now because we can see it immediately. And if we can fix it ourselves as a remote support group for their IT shop, if we can fix it ourselves, we will. If it can't be fixed and they need to roll a truck because, something went down physically, then we escalate it to their support team and they take care of it. But that remote support is missing, proactive remote support is missing in the industry of digital signage and kiosks, because it's all reactive. You get notified about a problem and then you have to address it. So that's a differentiator. And when we can go to our customers and say, hey, here's our software, and oh, by the way, we have this ability, it's a game changer for them. Because if I say this to somebody in the company that doesn't deal with it on every day, they're like, oh, that sounds nice. But if I deal with the guy at the IT shop that actually has to maintain this system, he's like, oh, you hit a nerve. Yes, please, I need this. I get yelled at all the time, he says, because this is down. And I didn't get notified till 1 hour ago. But they say, hey, this has been down for 2 days. And now he's getting blamed for it being down for 2 days, when they didn't notify him until just an hour ago. So this tool enables him to take that heat off his back and actually solve the problem.
That is actually makes perfect sense. Having been in IT for 30 years, it makes sense when you go, they're trying to buy it from you. They really don't care that you're monitoring it. But then also the person that cares is that store manager. They just know that if it goes down, that someone's going to be notified, that ticket gets open automatically, those kinds of things. Maybe not automatically, but automatically somebody else does it instead of them. And there's much greater uptime than downtime, which is good. Let's talk about some of the providers, not specifically by name, but you mentioned that there were a number of providers that you looked at, and then you ended up choosing RealVNC. We had a little bit about that conversation, but I want to ask kind of a bit of a different bent. I think you explained well why you picked RealVNC, but when you were looking for a solution, period, what were the must-haves in terms of functionality and the nice-to-haves that you wanted to find in a solution?
Well, the must-have, first of all, was we didn't want to have to open up a portal of the solution and then it was all the screens were listed on there, and we had to select one at a time. We needed to be able to do it 100 at a time or 1,000 at a time, just open them all up, depending upon our compute power that we're using and the number of screens. So that was a must-have. Nice to haves. Obviously, they all had to be of high quality, but they all actually are. We're living in an age now where there's no, as long as you have a decent internet connection, you're going to have high enough quality video. That's not going to be a problem. But the other thing was connectivity. So sometimes what we found out is I would try to connect with another company's remote software, and it would not be able to connect to that machine. I had installed both RealVNC and another product as remote access software on the machine, and the other one couldn't connect. Probably, I don't know, but probably because the internet connection just wasn't quite good enough. But then with RealVNC, I would try to connect and I would get on. So I know the internet to the machine is valid. It's got a connection. But the other tool simply couldn't connect. It would just time out. It would sit there in hourglass. So that was another reason why we really liked RealVNC. Now there have been a few times when it was the rules have been switched, and I couldn't connect with RealVNC, but the other tool could. But 90% of the times, it's because RealVNC does connect when other tools don't. And I think it's because of the connectivity quality, but I don't know for sure. Never been able to figure out exactly why that happens.
Dom, is RealVNC good in low bandwidth scenarios? I wonder if that's the...
Yeah, I was kind of thinking...
guessing something that happened, a couple of times many years ago or whatnot, but what's your thought there?
Yeah, it could be something like that. So, VNC as a protocol, not as a protocol, but VNC as a technology and RFB as the underlying protocol is really adaptable to whatever bandwidth you've got. So you might get slow updates or you might get lower quality images, but it should connect no matter what. The other thing that we have is we have cloud connectivity, so we can do the kind of both endpoints negotiating the best route between those two endpoints, and it's pretty effective for getting through complicated situations like NAT and firewall. But yeah, we've got use cases where people are using VNC in the past with 3G and earlier kind of connectivity out to agricultural machines, and it was okay for the use case that they had. So it should adapt well.
And I've been surprised because I can be working in my home office, which was where I am now, and I've got 6 42-inch portrait-mounted screens in my office here to be able to monitor all these screens. So I can put up 100 connections on those screens and monitor them. And I'm on Cox cable, and I'm able to open up 100 connections to 50 stores, 2 kiosks in each stores across the nation. And they're all live, and I'm watching people order food and drink on these kiosks in real time. And it's just amazing to me, actually, that it works, because the bandwidth I have is not the best. And like I said, it's a home office across a residential Cox cable connection. And so I'm really impressed with RealVNC to be able to do that. Not only that, some of the other tools that we've used, they actually cut me off when I get to a certain number of connections. For instance, with one tool whose name I won't mention, I can open up 5 connections. When I try to even using their portal software, when I try to open up that 6, it sits there in hourglass. 7 hourglass, 8 hourglass. I can't get past 5 connections. I don't know why. I'm pretty sure they've restricted it. It's not because of any technology issue. They just decided we're not going to let people open more than 5. They need to take care of those 4 before they open up another one. Whatever. That doesn't work for me. And another thing, one other thing that was a big plus for RealVNC is I can go onto these devices without the person on the other end knowing that I'm connecting to it. Now, that's a bad thing when you're trying to hack into somebody's computer, of course, but that's not the case. I own both ends of this connection. Those are my machines, both of them. So if I want to remote onto that remote kiosk, which is out in the public, I should be able to do that without something having to pop up and say, hey, you're being monitored right now. No, I don't want that. I should be able to look and see what's on the screen without interrupting the customer, because they could be ordering food and they're like, what's this connection message coming up here? And it just stops their whole flow. So this tool enables me to not be intrusive and to simply support my remote devices without having to notify somebody on the screen that I'm doing it. That is a big plus. And I don't think any of the other tools do that to the degree that RealVNC allows.
It's interesting that I was going to ask you about the enhancement that by using RealVNC Connect, the enhancement you've seen with your customers' experience using your solutions. And you just sort of touched on one, which is the whole, they don't need to know that I'm monitoring them. Obviously, you're not snooping, but you're just wanting to make sure it's up and running, but they're always being monitored. There's more uptime. But is there other kind of enhancements in the customer experience for your customers since you've put RealVNC Connect in?
Yeah, because now when I'm working with a remote technician, for instance, and this happens all the time, let's say there's a problem, they're reporting something that's happening that I can't see on the screen. Well, I can talk to the remote technician. He can be on the screen, I can be on the screen, and I can say, okay, did it print out, did the kiosk spit out the receipt? And so I can work with him, and he and I can actually collaborate on the screen. So that's very valuable when I am actually diagnosing and troubleshooting the problem using RealVNC to make that happen.
And then you've touched on going from, in essence, manually connecting to one machine to see if one machine is working to now the 17,000 screens you have in front of you on your 6 42-inch monitors. I was actually jealous when you said that. I'm like, I want 6 42-inch monitors in front. I don't know what I do with it, but it just sounds really cool.
It heats up your room a lot, though. I will say that.
You get hot and you get hungry in there. I'm sure you do. Oh, pizza! That sounds pretty good. I think I would like a pizza. But just the shift from, let's say, manually connecting to a machine to see if it's up and running or not, to what you're using now, seeing all these hundreds and hundreds of monitors on one screen. It obviously there's a wonderful scalability factor that your organization has enjoyed. What kind of impact does that scalability look like? How have you been able to scale, manage demand better, handle more customers? I mean, how has RealVNC Connect changed that for your business?
Yeah, so as far as scalability, we can fit about 100, I call them portals, but they're just windows to these remote screens. We can put about 100 portals on one 4K device. I can squeeze them in there. And the compute power, I've got an i7 that's got, I don't know, close to 50 gigs of RAM. So it's pretty powerful. It's an i7 that's like 2 or 3 years old, so it's not the most powerful, but it does fine. And so we can get about 100 portals to display on one compute device and one screen. So if we're going to look at 1,000, we need to have multiple devices, because we can't look at 1,000 on one compute device. Then it would be a bottleneck at the CPU utilization issue. So that's the scalability, how we do it. So, and typically you don't need, let's say a customer has 1,000 screens. I don't need to see all 1,000 at the same time. I just need to rotate through them. I'll look at 100, shut those all down. It takes about 60 seconds when I tell it to shut them all down. And then all those screens are shut down, and I open up another 100, and that takes about 60 seconds to open them and then position them on the screen in an organized fashion. So I can go through those 1,000 screens within 15 minutes easily, just looking at every screen. So that's how we scale. We use the same device to look at multiple groups of screens. If I was an organization wanted to see 1,000 at one time, I'd simply put 10 screens, 10 devices up in a room, and I would be able to do that, but we just don't have that need.
And then what future opportunities do you see for REJI's growth as a result of integrating RealVNC Connect? Is there something that you're planning on doing, in the future? I'm not asking you to tell us your roadmap or give away your company's secrets, but what future opportunities do you see that this has opened up for you?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, we started out writing software for the kiosk and digital signage, especially transactional software. And we still do that, and that's our bread and butter. However, in the last 12 to 18 months, what we've seen is our Viewport product, which is the product that allows you to monitor all these things. And we were using it for our customers and then introducing it to potential customers that we were trying to win the business. They actually fell in love with the ability to monitor their existing environment. Sometimes, and they said, we aren't going to use your software because we already have software for our kiosk or for our digital signage, but nobody's doing what you're doing with this viewport software, which uses RealVNC underneath the covers. If it wasn't for RealVNC, we couldn't have written viewport. And so now what we're finding is this viewport product with RealVNC is just as valuable, if not more valuable for our company than the bread and butter we've done in the past, which is writing software for the kiosk. But now being able to help organizations that aren't even using our software monitor and maintain their hundreds or thousands of kiosks. So that's our future, I think, is, we're doubling down and placing more emphasis on selling and marketing viewport, because we don't see anything else out there that's doing this at this time. Now, after this podcast comes out, I imagine there might be some entrepreneur thinking individuals say, hey, I can use RealVNC, and they could do that. But there's a lot of other stuff involved in it to make it a very effective tool as far as positioning it on the screen and allowing your customers to be able to organize them the way they want. I want Southwest region over here, and how do you set that up? You don't want to make it a manual process. So we've written software that enables them to open the screens, put them over there, click a button, and it saves that template, and that's used for the Southwest region where the screens are placed, the windows are placed on the screen. So yeah, that's. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does. There's no right or wrong answer here, so I think that's actually a really good one. I think just the fact that it lets you focus on your other aspects of your business, where at least okay, I have that part of my business, which is a huge part, right? Keeping it up and running. You talked about 5 nines of uptime. That's pretty impressive to be able to say that. And so just having that alone just tells us that, yes, we can go focus on innovating new product, or finding new customers, or moving to new regions, or whatever it is. And that's actually a great answer. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Don, let me ask you a couple of kind of closing questions. And Frank, I have one that also want to include you on here. And that's just for those that have joined us for the first time on this 3rd podcast of our series. Where should those listening begin the process if they wanted to get on that remote access integration bandwagon that Frank just said? Somebody might go, yes, I want to be entrepreneurial. I think I want to add that to my solution. Where should they begin the process?
Yeah, so I think once someone has decided that they, what they want to try and achieve, they've got some idea of the use case in their head, come talk to us, obviously. Actually, no, genuinely, it's probably a good idea to look around at what there is. Check out the sorts of things that you're getting from our competitors and from us. Compare them. But yeah, come to talk to us. We can discuss the approaches that you might take, whether it's Connect, OEM, or SDK. The customer will need to think about how much ownership they need of this, how much ownership they want of the solution. Think about resourcing. And we can advise on the effort required and come up with a plan of action together. Start simple, build it up to something much more complicated, as REJI are doing, and move on to the SDK, so something really, really tailored and integrated and quite special. I think it sounds like it could be, and then take a trial with whichever solution makes sense, and try and build a proof of concept with our help. I think that's the process. And
then Frank, kind of a question for you, and Dom, I'll let you make a comment on this. Frank, I'm assuming you've got better customer satisfaction. If you're doing Net Promoter Score kind of methodologies, you're getting better scores now since you've integrated remote access into your product. Is that the case? Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. The great news is people, they don't even notice our system anymore because it just runs all the time. And that's a good statement when people aren't ever bothering you because you don't hear from them for 6 months because everything just runs smoothly. People who are using our viewport software, they love it. We don't hear from them because everything just runs. I might mention there's RealVNC did a case study on our viewport software. I think it's on the website, RealVNC's website. And so it explains how that all works. But customers really like it. And we've actually had the point where some customers, as I mentioned earlier, see the viewport when we're demoing all our platform, and they buy that first. They want that before they even look into actually swapping out their software that's on the kiosk with something that we could replace. And sometimes that's where the deal ends. They just continue to use viewport and they keep their old software. But we love that because, our foot's in the door. We're selling them a solution. And viewport, once you have it up and running, RealVNC, it just works. It's not like something else where you have to constantly maintain it. It just runs all the time. Remember, when we're doing software for transactional, menu ordering software on a kiosk, there's always maintenance on that thing. Not necessarily your source code, but they're changing the menu. They're putting together different combos, and they're saying, "Hey, we've got a new loyalty card we're bringing in." So you're always having to maintain that software because they're always changing. Their business is always changing. That menu is dynamic. The products they're selling are dynamic. But with Viewport, once we get that installed and running, it just runs. And so we actually, from a profitability standpoint, it's a lot more fun to sell Viewport than it is to build software that we have to maintain all the time, because the money rolls in and we don't have to do much for it. We build it once, sell it many. Whereas the other stuff, you're constantly babysitting it and maintaining it. As they change their business, you've got to change your software on the kiosk.
Mm-hmm. Makes good sense. And then, Frank, one last question for you. And Dom, I'd like to also get your kind of closing remarks here. Frank, what's the most important bit of advice that you want to give to a company thinking about doing remote access integration?
Well, in the sense that we are doing, because we're not doing the remote desktop support, in the sense what we're doing, I would just give them the suggestion of just build it and then start using it, or have your customers start using it, because once you do, they'll love it and you'll find out the value. I remember I was CEO of another software company about 10 years ago, and we put a feature into our software that nobody was really asking for, maybe one or two customers. And then we started advertising it. We were selling the product, and everybody wanted that feature. So it was funny because nobody asked for it, or very few ever asked for it. Once it's in there, everybody wanted it. So it was one of those situations where we realized there was an appetite for it. They didn't even know they had an appetite for it. And that's the way it is with this tool. Once you start using RealVNC to display all your screens at one time, that's when you'll realize, oh, I can't live without this. But you didn't know that 6 months prior. You just didn't know you needed it. But as soon as you try it out, then you can't live without it. If you've got hundreds or thousands of screens, it's a no-brainer. Those 5 nines, it's not, everybody can do 5 nines as far as when they know the problem is and they can fix it. I mean, if they're a competent company, they can do that. The reason it's hard to reach 5 nines is because you don't know the screen or the kiosk has been down for an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours a day. So that takes away from your uptime, and it wasn't your fault. But with this tool, you're proactive, and now you can hit 5 nines because that 10 hours that it was down becomes 15 minutes, and now all of a sudden you hit 5 nines without even trying. It's not the support, it's the notification that kills your 5 nines.
Love it. And Dom, some advice that you've got as well, maybe for the audience listening, about if they want to get into remote access integration?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to go back to what Frank was saying, I think that, the customers, where they're aware of it, they love this sort of stuff, and you can be really collaborative in your support, and you can train customers, which is just, it's fantastic when it works, when you can, actually help someone through something that maybe not for this use case, but the customer support agents love it as well. I know, Frank, you said that already, but I think as soon as you don't have to deal with someone describing something, it's just a massive differentiator. It's like you're there. I guess advice-wise, my view is always in this whole industry is look at the security, and it might be that a particular integration doesn't need to concern itself too much with security, because it's all in some particular closed-off environment or whatever, or has its own pre-existing connections. But I think it's worth really looking at what's available out there. Look at who offers the sorts of guarantees and vulnerability tracking, third-party audits of the whole end-to-end solution, and white papers explaining, the security posture, and see, compare all of the different solutions on that basis, because the security is really key to prevent you having a really bad day, I think.
Wonderful, guys. Hey, thanks for a great conversation, both of you. This is actually, I think, really informative. Frank, thank you for being here and sharing, and letting us see kind of behind the curtain here, REJI, a little bit. That helps, I think, those that are listening get a sense of practically how this works, as opposed to just Dom. Obviously, no offense, but you and I are talking about this from one side of the conversation. We definitely have the other side of the conversation on today's
definitely.
discussion. So that is all the time that we have today. I've been talking with Dom Parks. He's lead developer for OEM at RealVNC, and Frank Yoder, CEO at REJI. If you'd like more information on RealVNC and their OEM program, you can visit realvnc.com/OEM. And remember, this is the third episode in a 6-part series, so be on the lookout for all the podcast episodes in this series and your choice of podcast platform. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch you all in the next one.